Hello, it is now 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You have joined the prosecutorial engagement working with prosecutors to create sustainable diversion efforts for people with behavioral health needs in a criminal justice system webinar. To allow for more participants past the hour, we will begin the webinar in a few minutes. Hello, everyone. I'm Demetrius Thomas, Deputy Program Director here at the Council of State Governments Justice Center in the Behavioral Health Division. Again, thank you for joining today's prosecutorial engagement, working with prosecutors to create sustainable diversion efforts for people with behavioral health needs in the criminal justice system webinar. Today's webinar is funded by the Department of Justice, Bureau of Justice Assistance, BJA, and is done in collaboration with the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys, APA. To give you an overview of today's webinar, first I will introduce the speaker. Then there will be a brief overview on the Council of State Governments Justice Center and the Bureau of Justice Assistance. After that, there will be a brief overview of the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys. We will then go into a presentation which will include introductions and information from the program highlight staff on their prosecutorial engagement work, followed by speaker and panelist Q&A, and then finally there will be a larger discussion portion where you can discuss prompted questions about your prosecutorial engagement, followed by a quick closeout. A few housekeeping items. Anytime during the webinar, you can ask a question by typing it into the Q&A panel on the bottom right-hand portion of your screen. This includes both technical and content-related questions. We will try to reply to technical questions in the chat window as we go. For all content-related questions, we will keep a running list and address them at the appropriate Q&A discussion in the webinar. We will do our best to get through as many questions as possible. If you encounter technical or audio problems during this webinar, please call WebEx for technical support at 1-866-229-3239, 1-866-229-3239. Please understand that there are some technical issues that we may not be able to resolve. However, we are recording the webinar and will post it on our website by the end of the week. Our speaker for today is Rebecca Neville. She is a staff attorney and member of the general counsel team at APA. Prior to joining the APA, Rebecca worked in family law and served as assistant state's attorney in Prince George's County, Maryland. She prosecuted general misdemeanor crimes and specialized in domestic and family violence cases involving spouses, families, and intimate partners. Rebecca obtained both her JD and master's in social work from the Catholic University of America and worked in the social services field prior to attending law school. Next, I'll provide some overview on the mission of both CSG Justice Center and BJA. The Council of State Governments Justice Center, the Justice Center, is a national nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that combines the power of membership association representing state officials in all three branches of government with the expertise of a policy and research team focused on assisting others to attain measurable results. Our staff develops research-driven strategies to increase public safety and strengthen communities. This next slide describes a bit more about our work style and how we strive to reflect Justice Center core values, which include a commitment to being independent and nonpartisan in every aspect of our work, providing vigorous, trusted, high-quality analysis, developing practical and innovative solutions informed by data and research, promoting collaboration and building consensus, and being inclusive and respectful of diverse views and experiences. The Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program, which we commonly refer to as JMHCP program, is to develop collaboration across the criminal justice and behavioral health systems from law enforcement, pretrial, courts, jail, and community supervision, to learn how to have successful partnerships that increase efficiencies, improve public safety and outcomes for people with mental illness or co-occurring mental illness and substance abuse addiction in the criminal legal system. BJA's mission is to help to make communities safer by strengthening the nation's criminal justice system. Its grants, training, and technical assistance in policy development services provide state, local, and indigenous nations with the cutting-edge tools and best practices they need to reduce violence and drug-related crimes, support law enforcement, and combat victimization. Thanks again, everyone, for joining today's webinar. I'll be back a little later. I am now going to turn it over to Rebecca, who will provide an overview on the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys and get us started with the presentation. Rebecca?
Thank you, Demetrius, and I want to say thank you to all of our attendees, and a special thank you to the Council of State Governments Justice Center, BJA, for organizing and hosting this presentation. And a special thank you to our two panelists who are here today who do this work on a daily basis and are taking their time to share their expertise and experiences with us. The Association of Prosecuting Attorneys is a national nonprofit whose mission is to support and enhance the effectiveness of prosecutors in their efforts to create safer communities through a more just and equitable legal system. APA, we are a highly experienced leader in the field of national training and technical assistance, and our membership includes prosecutors' offices, elected, appointed, and line prosecutors, justice system professionals, and community partners. Our staff includes experienced attorneys, and we are led by practicing elected and appointed prosecutors. Through our numerous projects, committees, advisory boards, and partnerships, and various collaborative efforts, APA is a national clearinghouse for the innovative and effective prosecutorial practices. Next slide, please. So in today's discussion, we want to start out with providing some basic context for understanding the role of the prosecutor in diversion. Anytime you're going to engage with someone from a different industry or field, it's really important to understand where they come from and how they understand the role in the system, as well as their goals and mission and purpose for engaging with you, and specifically, in this case, in diversion. Next slide. So prior to engaging prosecutors in diversion efforts, it's really crucial to understand their role in the criminal justice system overall. So many people don't realize if they're not in the criminal justice system itself, but all prosecutors are not the same and they don't prosecute the same crimes. So you have federal prosecutors, county level prosecutors, even city prosecutors. And so learning the jurisdiction where your prosecutor can practice and those boundaries will be important for knowing which communication your diversion program will impact if you engage with that specific office. Additionally, not all prosecutors get into office the same way. I've mentioned that there are elected prosecutors, which are the majority of prosecutors across the country, but there are a few jurisdictions and states that allow for prosecutors to be appointed, for example, in New Jersey. And there are also different levels of prosecutors. So knowing who in the office you're going to be engaging with, who you're going to contact is important, because there are executive level attorneys and deputies that are making the office policy, implementing the programs, really shaping what the office mission and goals look like. You have mid-level prosecutors who are handling crimes, leading divisions and units, implementing that office policy. And you have line prosecutors who are really in court on a regular daily basis, but do not necessarily, while they have a voice, they may not be shaping the office policy or creating it. They are the implementers. But each of these prosecutors is a minister of justice. Prosecutors' main role is to seek justice and uphold public safety. So really every prosecutor you come into contact with should have programs or desires, and their mission and office goals should be aligned with those two things. With enhanced criminal justice reform efforts, prosecutors have continued to see the benefits of diversion and alternatives to incarcerations. Prosecutors don't necessarily have a client in the traditional sense, so really engaging in ways to serve their community can be that definition of justice and lead to greater diversion efforts and upholding their role as a minister of justice. Next slide, please. So when you're thinking about engaging with a prosecutor on a program and how it can align with their goals, prosecutors generally have seen many benefits to diversion, particularly in cases with behavioral health needs. It can reduce recidivism and prevent relapse. Research shows that these cases with individuals accused of crimes that have behavioral health needs often have higher rates of recidivism than cases without behavioral health needs. So being able to interrupt that cycle to prevent a person from future contact with the criminal justice system can be a definition of seeking justice. Providing services to community members, again, prosecutors don't serve a specific client, so the community is really what the prosecutor is seeking to serve, and providing services would be that definition. And finally, a diversion program can assist with addressing the root causes of crime by directly addressing the behavioral health needs of accused individuals, reducing contact with the criminal justice system, and preventing potentially further trauma from incarceration and other collateral consequences, such as losing someone's employment or housing. However, prosecutors are not treatment providers, and so they may not always be aware of the available behavioral health interventions that are out there. And this is particularly at a time where we are experiencing, offices are experiencing large backlogs as a result of the pandemic. So really being able to engage them and demonstrate or point out some available behavioral health interventions is going to be important. And finally, having that behavioral health professional at the table early in the diversion planning process can ensure that behavioral health considerations are done at each stage in the diversion planning process. So from case screening, who is looking at the case to divert it, to eligibility requirements for diversion, which crimes are going to be acceptable for a diversion program. And then to even finding, as I mentioned, the available treatment providers in the area or new and cutting edge behavioral health interventions that prosecutors might not be aware of. Next slide. So with this background, there are some basic research tips before you engage with a prosecutor to discuss a diversion program or engage them in their work. One would be understanding their priorities. Many elected prosecutors have campaign websites or their own office web pages that list priorities and policies for their office that you can really align with the goals for your potential diversion program. Looking up current programs and office partners. Many offices have already active diversion programs or have been involved in diversion programs in the past for certain offenses or populations. They have been doing this work for a very long time. So knowing who's currently involved in a diversion program or what treatment providers in the community have been involved can help you engage that partner, build that relationship, and be able to approach that prosecutor with you. And then researching the individual prosecutor's background. Understanding your prosecutor can help bridge that gap in practices. The importance of relationship building when creating a diversion program cannot be overstated. Being able to find ways that you can create a connection, build trust between you and the prosecutor in that office during both the planning stage and the implementation stage of your diversion program are going to be critically important. And then finally, engaging collaborative partners in your efforts, reaching out to those treatment providers in your area that you're aware of, anyone else who's worked with the prosecutor's office in the past that may be able to engage with you, collaborate with you, any allies you may find in other entities in the criminal justice system as well. Again, building that trust, building that collaborative relationship so that when you are engaging with your prosecutor, you've really got ways that you can work together and ideas about how this diversion program will be implemented. Next slide. And now, before our presenters, we'll give you some brief strategies for effective engagement. Next slide. One would be understanding the context and language of the criminal justice arena. If you are not a practitioner currently, understanding the language that prosecutors speak is important. I've mentioned a few today in terms of the rate of recidivism, pre-arrest diversion versus post-arrest diversion versus deflection. What all of these different words and languages mean to prosecutors. It just can be very helpful to make your conversation flow more smoothly and really give you great context for questions that the prosecutor you engage with may ask. And coming to the table with reasonable goals and points of agreement, you may find that you agree on more than you think, that certain crimes shouldn't be included in diversion or certain interventions should really be used. Again, focusing on that justice and safety goal of the prosecutor's office. And avoiding blame. I think everyone can agree we're all human, and finger pointing really tends to hurt that relationship, that collaborative relationship that you're trying to build. So being able to find, again, just ways that you can come together and really seek those common goals rather than trying to tear down that relationship is going to be critical to moving forward to a successful program. Joining local criminal justice coordinating councils or task forces to collaborate on other initiatives or potentially future grants tailored to criminal justice reform. Many offices have a representative on the task force or coordinating council, and these are wonderful neutral settings that are often informal, coming in, going out, that you can engage with prosecutors on a regular basis in a neutral and informal way. Next slide. And then enlisting outside experts or internal allies to facilitate those conversations. So again, do you have an ally in another criminal justice entity? Is there someone that you've worked with in the police department, on the public defender side, that really can help, an external researcher mayhaps, that can really help facilitate conversations about diversion programs with what you are trying to do and your goal to bridge that communication gap, and again, building that trust. Brainstorming funding and data sharing opportunities. I think everyone, especially at this stage where we are in this pandemic, has concerns about funding opportunities and really being able to share data. I know HIPAA often comes up as one of the things that people have concerns about and ways that data can be shared. So bringing that information to the table, bringing those suggestions to the table can go a long way to building trust and addressing early concerns. And committing to culture change by engaging known staff in collaborative efforts. If you know a prosecutor, will they engage with you in just establishing cross-collaborative training, roundtable conversations, really opportunities just for agency stakeholders to engage at all levels. And then being responsive to respective constituencies. Your organization and the prosecutor's office may or may not have different goals or missions, but being able to respect each one and finding the common ground will again allow that relationship in the collaborative way to go forward. And finally, being intentional, positive relationships, finding time to meet with individual prosecutors, asking people to lunch or a cup of coffee. Really, to sum up, we are all people first. And the crux of any successful diversion program is trust and relationship building. So being intentional and specific about building that relationship early and often is going to be the key to your diversion program. Next slide. And now we'll have our panelist presentations on the collaboration for successful diversion programming. Next slide. Our first panelist is going to be Jeffrey House. He's the first assistant to the district attorney in Multnomah County District Attorney's Office. Jeff received his undergraduate degrees from Portland State University in 1990 and his JD from the University of Oregon School of Law in 1995. He has worked as a deputy district attorney in Multnomah County for his entire career. Jeff has prosecuted nearly every type of case, including spending 7 years prosecuting major felony domestic violence cases and 4 years in the child abuse unit. From 2008 to 2012, Jeff was assigned to the office liaison to the Portland Police Bureau Cold Case Homicide Unit, successfully prosecuting cases that range from 12 to 40 years old. And Jeff has served as an adjunct professor at Lewis and Clark Law School, served as the member of the Oregon State Bar Board of Bar Examiners for 12 years, and currently serves on a policy committee for the National Conference of Bar Examiners. In early 2020, Jeff led the team that successfully prosecuted the case of State versus Jeremy Christian. And since 2012, Jeff has served as the first assistant to the district attorney.
Thanks,
Jeff,
Rebecca.
I'll turn it over to you.
I hope I can live up to that billing. And thanks everybody for participating in this webinar. It really is my pleasure to be here to talk about some of the things that we've accomplished here in Multnomah County, which is Portland, Oregon, and some of the things that we hope to accomplish. Like Rebecca said, I've been doing this now for almost 27 years, and I'm serving as the second in charge now to my third district attorney. I've only worked for 3 district attorneys in 27 years. The most recent was elected in May of 2020 and took over in August of 2020. A rough time to take over a big and busy office in the middle of a pandemic, and also about 75 days into what ended up being about 120 days of very active sort of civil unrest in our streets after the murder of George Floyd. But my current district attorney, my boss, Mike Schmidt, came in writing a platform of reform, and he has stuck to it. He's a wonderful DA and very smart person, and I'm excited to talk about some of the things that we're doing under Mike Schmidt. Next slide, please. So this is what else happened back in 2020 was Oregon's Ballot Measure 110 passed. It was an initiative, so some active folks got together and gathered enough signatures to get Ballot Measure 110 onto the ballot. What it did was it served to decriminalize user quantities of most street drugs. And user quantities in this context means that someone could possess a gram of heroin, 40 units of LSD, 12 grams of psilocybin or psychedelic mushrooms, 2 grams of methamphetamine. And if they are contacted by law enforcement in possession of such quantities of such controlled substances, they will not be charged with a crime. They will not be cited for a crime. They will be issued a non-criminal violation summons. And the new law says that if the person that receives such a summons makes a phone call and undergoes a brief health assessment by phone, and has that the fact that they made that call recorded, they can then, when they do go to court, they can have their citation dismissed. They will have their citation dismissed. So quite a forward-thinking and new way to approach substance abuse in Oregon. One of the side effects that it had was it effectively ended our very active and quite successful drug treatment courts here in Multnomah County. We, 2 bosses ago, District Attorney Mike Shrunk started what we knew as Stop Court, which was a drug treatment court, post-charging. If someone elected and was eligible to enter our drug treatment court, they could undergo an assessment and then attend court on a weekly or bi-weekly or monthly basis, depending on their progress. And if they successfully completed 12 months, sometimes up to 18 months of participation in that court, their charge would be dismissed. But given now that most user quantity levels of drug possession are not criminal in Oregon and Multnomah County, there was no incentive for anyone to continue to participate in a drug treatment court. Next slide, please. What that did was, we had funding from the state for our drug treatment court, and because it was no longer being utilized, but the funding still remained, the funding stream still remained. We needed to think of a new way to sort of to repurpose those funds and create a different court. And really, well, what we're calling it is step court. Yesterday was actually the first day that participants could begin to engage in the process of getting into step court. What it is to me is sort of an amalgamation of all of our other treatment courts, but targeted at a more specific population. In Oregon, we've got mandatory minimum sentences for certain violent crimes, and those sentences are significant. For an assault in the first degree, if a person is convicted of assault in the first degree in Oregon, which means that one person harmed another to a significant degree with a weapon, and was convicted of that, that person was subjected to 90 months in state prison with no possibility of early release, very few treatment options, very few, no possibility of parole. The only way I guess they could possibly have their sentence shortened would be with a pardon or a commutation by our governor. But that's just for assault one. 90 months, 8.5 years or 7.5 years, a very significant punishment. So next slide, please. What we've decided to do was to get together with all of our sort of partners, and by partners I mean the court, the defense bar, our local mental health treatment providers, our local drug treatment providers, our parole and probation department, and just some interested citizens. And we said, listen, drug court is going away, but now we want to sort of take the next step in therapeutic or treatment courts, and let's try to let's see if we can address the people who commit violent crimes in our community, and rather than sentence them to 90 months in prison or 70 months in prison, and usually, and I think everybody probably knows this, usually we would engage in plea negotiations with someone charged with a serious violent felony, and oftentimes we would find ourselves agreeing to something like 36 months in prison or 48 months in prison, something like that. Still a long stretch in prison. And the discussion that I personally had with DA Mike Schmidt, my current DA, was like this, hey, we're going to send these people to prison for 36 months, 3 years. They're going to get some time off for good behavior and for credit for work and credit for the time they served before they went to prison. And so what we're talking about really is 24, 28 months in prison. And I'm not sure that we as a community are going to be safer at the back end of that. They're not going to have time for a lot of treatment. They're not going to have time to really address their criminogenic thinking. And what they're going to do is spend their time and then come out probably no better. And the risk of recidivism is going to be just as high. What if we decided that we would, instead of sending those people to prison for those short to medium length sentences, we treat them in the community and we actually dig deep into the underlying issues of their criminal behavior, and we try to address it, and we save money and prison bed space, and we keep families together, and we work to sort of eliminate those, short to medium length sentences by wrapping around services around these folks in a way that actually tries to address the root causes of their criminal behavior. Next slide, please. So, not everyone that commits one of these egregious crimes is eligible for step court. And, this is really the balance that we're trying to strike with step court. Some of these crimes are so bad, and some of the criminal histories that these folks come to us with are so severe that public safety, quite frankly, just demands that a prison sentence be offered, and if we can't come to an agreement on that, then we'll go to trial, and generally we win those trials, and they'll go to prison afterwards. And defendants may also opt out. Some defendants, and this comes from my 27 years experience, they don't have faith in themselves that they'll be able to jump through the hoops and the rigorous demands of a treatment court, and it might just be, I don't want to say easier, but maybe more efficient to simply take a short prison sentence and do that time and come out on parole, which is definitely less stringent than a treatment court, and just go about their lives. So some defendants may opt out. Next slide, please. Here's a list of, and I'm not going to dwell too long on this, but here's a list of the charges that are presumptively eligible for step court and a list of the ones that are not. Homicides, obviously, attempted murder, not eligible. Domestic violence, perpetrators of domestic violence, of intimate partner violence, have a very specific need in terms of treatment and therapy and whatnot, and this is not the court for those. Child abuse, sex crimes, kidnap one and arson one. I think that a lot of treatment providers here on this webinar will know that things like arson one, kidnap one are serious and probably maybe too serious for the milieu of a treatment court. Next slide. So this is really the process for how someone gets into step court. We're going to flag eligibility when the case first comes into my office. We've got a judge that is a leader nationally in treatment courts, Judge Eric Block. He has been integral in setting up this process. We're going to, as an office, we're going to take a look at cases that we've identified as eligible and pull cases that we know just would not be appropriate for the treatment court. Here's really the rub when it comes to what's going to happen once someone is eligible and we haven't pulled that eligibility, is the person's going to undergo an LSCMI, an assessment that assesses their risks and needs, and any other assessments their defense attorney will schedule, like an ASAM or a mental health evaluation. Once we get the results of those, all the parties are going to sit down and discuss whether or not step court is an appropriate place for that defendant to land. And if we can all agree on that, then we're going to make a pretrial offer, which includes participation in step court, or maybe prison. Maybe we're not going to be able to come to an agreement, or the person may be more appropriate for a different treatment court. And by that, really, I mean, we have a justice reinvestment court. We have a court that is mainly populated by people with an ongoing drug addiction that have committed property crimes. So it's really geared towards addressing their drug addiction, plus helping them stabilize in order to pay restitution. We also have a thriving mental health court, and I was a participant in the establishment of our mental health court back in 2008, 2009, and our mental health court is thriving. In fact, it's bursting at the seams. There's so many people that are involved in our mental health court. Next slide, please. I'm going to basically skip that slide. Let's go to the next one. For everyone on this call, I think that this will be an important slide, and I want to spend a little bit of time on it. As I said, each potential participant will be assessed via the LSCMI or an ASAM or a mental health eval or a different tool. We're going to focus on their risk factors outside of substance abuse. And that's important because this is not a drug treatment court, although it is in some ways modeled after traditional drug treatment courts. We're going to use Doug Marlowe's 4 quadrants in order to prescribe what treatment will be required of a person after they enter our court. And I think a lot of people know, and I obviously, we're aware that the LSCMI is not perfect for identifying into which quadrant a person should be placed. So we're doing a little bit of sort of jerry-rigging this process in order to try to make it work. This is obviously an experiment because we're taking what people that are guilty of violent crimes and saying, we want you to stay in the community, but you have to undergo this sort of treatment. Cognitive therapy is going to be a big part for those that might need it. DBT also will be a part. Rational emotive behavior therapy or self-instructional training, anger management, traditional anger management, or HEAT, habilitation, empowerment, accountability therapy, which is a trauma-informed, culturally responsive, developmentally targeted program for young Black men in the criminal justice system. So those are the sort of treatment options, along with if after an LSCMI or an ASAM, the person, and Demetrius mentioned this, some people are going to have undoubtedly co-occurring issues when they come into our court. They're going to maybe have a drug issue or an alcohol issue or some other needs that can be addressed through therapy. So this is not limiting, but rather a sort of some of the menu of treatment programs that people will be able to engage in. To get to this list, obviously, we had our local mental health professionals at the table. They've been at the table the entire time that we've been designing this court and have offered great suggestions, most of which we have adopted. And I'll say this, that between the mental health treatment providers that have been at the table, along with the drug and alcohol treatment providers, along with our probation department, who are the ones that are going to be actually shepherding people through these programs, that is what has made this court, I think, viable and something, I haven't mentioned the word victims yet, but a victim of a violent crime here in Multnomah County in Oregon, and I think probably throughout the nation, they are going to expect a certain level of accountability, possibly even punishment, for the person that inflicted the harm upon them. And this is going to be an area where we're going to employ our victim advocates to explain what this court is, explain why the district attorney's office has decided to make a non-prison offer or a much shorter prison offer for someone that under Oregon state law is subjected to a mandatory minimum 7-8 years in prison. And so this will be an interesting process. But one of the things we wanted to make sure was we get the person into the right quadrant. And if they're in the right quadrant, then we believe that their risk will be addressed and their needs will be addressed. And we believe, based on the success of using the 4-quadrant model in other treatment courts, that we will actually diminish recidivism with this group of violent offenders. Next slide. So it's a post-arraignment court. It's not a classic diversion. No one's going to get finished with step court and not have a criminal conviction on their record. What we hope is that they will get through their probation without having to go to state prison. We will use traditional treatment court methodology in terms of swift and immediate sanctions for behavior that is not congruent with the rules of the court, and we expect that it will result in lower jail bed usage, and particularly in Multnomah County, lower prison bed usage for communities of color. We, like I think a lot, probably most jurisdictions, struggle with racial and ethnic disparities in our criminal justice system. And if this is one way we can address that, then my boss and our deputies are all in. Next slide. We got a backlog of cases, and that's what yesterday was about, starting to attack that backlog. We're doing training internally, and we're doing training with our partners. And, I'd love to come back in a year, and maybe we're going to have this type of webinar in a year, and I'm going to tell everyone how it's going. Next slide. That's all I got. Laura, you're up.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I think that you highlighted so many wonderful things about your office and this program that I do hope we can come back in a year and you can give us that update. And now we'll be hearing from Lara Retzel. She is the Chief Deputy State's Attorney in Pennington County State's Attorney's Office. She is in Rapid City, South Dakota. She's a graduate of the University of Nebraska, Lincoln, and Creighton University School of Law. Ms. Retzel began her legal career as a prosecutor in 1996. From 2000 to 2003, she was in private practice, specializing in family law. And Ms. Retzel resumed her prosecutorial career in 2003. Since that time, Lara has been a felony prosecutor specializing in sexual assault and homicide cases. She currently serves as Pennington County's Chief Deputy. She's a statewide trainer on the investigation and prosecution of sexual assault and domestic violence offenses. And she was named the Victims Champion by Pennington County's Victims Advocacy Program. And her team was recognized by WAVY, which is Rapid City's domestic violence shelter, with their Spirit of Peace Award. And in 2017, she was also named South Dakota's Prosecutor of the Year. Lara, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. And Jeff, you're always a tough act to follow. That program is so ambitious and forward thinking. I'm really excited to see how you do with that. It's really brave. I want to start by talking about a part of what Rebecca touched on, which is in addressing how to engage prosecutors, you really need to know and understand who prosecutors are, because we're kind of a strange and unique animal in my perspective. I mean, yes, we're lawyers, and lawyers have some commonalities, right? They're passionate, they're compassionate, they're communicators, they're supposed to be good listeners, they tend to be skeptical. Well, prosecutors are this strange little subsect of lawyers. We make up only like a fraction, like 1 to 3% of all the lawyers in the nation are prosecutors. But that fraction of lawyers, we have more power over a person's life and liberty than really anyone else in the entire country when you think about it. So we tend to have a really strong sense of fairness, and we tend to be very law enforcement and victim-centered. We tend to have as a very strong core value community safety. And yes, we tend to be exceptionally good communicators and very compassionate. Most of us have a little bit of a flair for the dramatic and a tendency to have a dark sense of humor. So now you know a little bit about prosecutors, and that's important. So we have tremendous discretion in our positions, and we take that very, very seriously. So when you're thinking about engaging prosecutors in your communities, I think you need to think about who we are, right? And what our core values are. So I'm going to divide my thoughts on engaging prosecutors into kind of two categories. One is convincing the old people like Jeff and I, the old guard, to invest in new diversion programs like the innovative one that Jeff just told you about. And the other is how to onboard those baby prosecutors into existing programs. So once the old guard has started them up and you need to keep them moving, How do you get those babies on board and involved? So if you're trying to convince the top tier prosecutors, the electeds and the first assistants like Jeff and chief deputies like me, let me tell you a little bit about how we feel about the criminal justice system. So when we started out in the early 90s and in the 2000s, it was really cool to be a prosecutor. It was really great. Like, we wore the white hat, and kids wanted to grow up and be law enforcement officers, and they don't anymore, you guys. They don't anymore. It's not cool to be a prosecutor. It's really hard to be a cop. I always wanted to be a prosecutor. When I was growing up in second grade, I announced that I was going to be a lawyer for cops. And I knew it from that moment forward. That doesn't happen anymore. It's a different world that we live in. So my generation, we've seen frequent flyers bounce in and out of the criminal justice system for literally decades. We know all about the failings and inequalities and inequities of the system that we work in. Most days we feel like we come to work and just bang our heads against the wall over and over again, and then we go home and then we come back the next day and we do it again, right? We're frustrated by the system. We want to do better. We really do. We're problem solvers. So middle-agers like Jeff and I, we're, Gen X. We like stability. We don't like change. We're a little bit risk averse. So if you're trying to onboard us with a new program, you need to convince us that what you're offering is better than the present alternative, right? So you need to focus on what's available now. So not the probation and parole of the 90s and early 2000s that we came up with. You need to have them look at how probation exists today and it's failing, and how parole exists today and it doesn't work. You need to remind us of that, and you need to tell us how you're going to do better. There's less supervision on probation and parole than there have ever been in history, and those programs have never worked. And we know that. Remind us of that. They don't work. Once people are in the system, they stay in the system. Recidivism rates are ridiculously high, 62% for parole, 43% for probationers. The system doesn't work. Remind us of that. So what if we could keep people out of the system? Remind us of that. Wouldn't that be great if we could keep people out of the system? So in my county, our diversion recidivism rates are like 16 and 17%. That's fantastic compared to the probation and parole alternatives, right? Use those statistics. Impress us with how we can do better with a diversion program than we can do under the existing system. So for those that are similarly situated in my county, the ones that don't go to diversion, that aren't accepted or don't agree to be part of our program, 60 to 70% recidivism. So compare 16 to 17% to 60 to 70%. That's how you convince an old person to onboard a new diversion program. So when you're talking to us, remind us about how unhappy we really are with existing probation and parole. Tell us that diversion programs are going to allow us to have direct engagement with system-involved people and a real opportunity to identify and fix root problems. That excites us. The opportunity to fix problems, that really, really excites prosecutors. And this excites old and young prosecutors across the board. And it even excites conservative constituents, which is what my county is completely full of. The idea that we can do better than what the current systems offer. So in our prosecution-led diversion programs, the prosecutor has complete control, right, over what happens to that client. We get to have a caseworker that we've hired. We get to design a program that we know will address the root issue. We get to tailor that to the individual client. The prosecutor gets all the control. Trust me, prosecutors love control. They want all the control. So remind them with a prosecution-led diversion program, they'll get to design it, put it in the hands of people they trust, and have the control to make it work in their house. That's how you convince them. So those babies, once you have great programs, and I know a lot of you do, you have fantastic programs, you have those babies, and you have a whole nother set of problems when your old guard, they get them up and running and they're great, and then now you have to convince these babies to take on those programs. So those babies, they tend to be millennials, right? So you have to over communicate with them, right? They want to understand why your program was started. They want to know why it's working. They want to know why you're continuing to do it. If you think you need to talk to them 5 times, talk to them 10 times, because they want to be over communicated with, and they love feedback. When you're onboarding new prosecutors to your programs, give them lots and lots of feedback. Every little success story, shoot it their way. They'll see that as a personal reward. They love personal rewards, and they want to hear that they're being successful. Invite conversations and never be offended when they challenge you, because they will. It's just how they were raised. They ask a lot of why questions, and we tend to get defensive, like, how dare you challenge my beautiful diversion program? But they're asking why because they really want to know, and they really want to understand, and they have good ideas. So be kind to them, be gentle with them, pat them on their heads and tell them they're pretty, metaphorically. Encourage them, because listen, those baby prosecutors, those baby lawyers, they could have gone to big firms. They could be making a lot more money than they're making in that prosecutor's office. They're here for a reason. Find out the reason why. It's probably really heartfelt and genuine. They're here for a reason. Embrace them into your programs, remind them of their why, get them on board, and they're going to be your new champions, and they're going to carry your programs forward. So now that I've given you my advice on engaging old and baby prosecutors, I want to tell you just a little bit about the menu of programs that we have in Pennington County, because we're just a little county. In South Dakota, where Rapid City is between the Black Hills and the Badlands. We're kind of a small 110,000 population. 9% of our population is Native American, lower middle class, average household salary about 58,000. My office has 63 people, 23 attorneys. And I say all that only to encourage those of you that are listening and think that you're too small to do anything. You're not. You're not too small to do anything. And you can be really, really successful with diversion programs regardless of your size. And a lot of times size is to your advantage, because you can do a lot of creative things on a smaller scale that can turn out to be really, really effective. So we have always done juvenile diversion in Pennington County, but in 2016, we got a new elected. His name is Mark Vargo, and he was brilliant enough to say, why are we not doing diversion with adults? So we parlayed our work with juvenile diversion into young adult diversion, which many of you are doing, recognizing brain science and contrasting that with the terrible collateral consequences for young people who have convictions. So we do that, and I'll stand for any questions you have about our young adult diversion program. But we moved young adult diversion into adult diversion when we recognized that there were people with silver hair that were similarly situated, making bad decisions for bad reasons, a lot of them tied to behavioral health, a lot of them tied to addiction. One of our origin stories was a woman who assaulted a police officer. We're not afraid of including violent crime in our diversion programs, as long as our victim is onboarded and in agreement and can walk alongside us in that project. This woman assaulted a police officer. We targeted her for adult diversion, which I colloquially call Diversion Silver, because of the silver in the hair of some of our participants. And she ended up going to mental health counseling, addiction counseling, partnered her up with the church, because what we found when we brought her in for her intake meeting was that underneath that violent assault on a police officer was a woman who had never disclosed childhood sexual abuse, never talked about the fact that she was in a terrible marriage involving domestic violence. And now, years after the fact, she says that young adult or adult diversion was the best thing that ever happened to her. And that, she met her charming, perfect husband at the church that was part of her program. It just, those stories, the ones that warm your heart, are the ones that kind of keep you moving forward in the diversion efforts. Oh, and before I forget to mention, as part of all of our diversion, they're pre-plea. So not only do you not have a conviction at the end if you successfully complete, but we also help you expunge that arrest, so you don't even have the arrest on your record when you're done. So then we moved from adult diversion into drug diversion. In South Dakota, we like methamphetamine, but we also like heroin and opioids a lot. So we're making a lot of progress. And if you want any of my statistics, I can present those when we stand for questions. Very successful programs. But the one that I want to spend a minute telling you about, we're piloting 2 experimental programs right now. One is domestic violence diversion. It's a very touchy subject because it's just so dangerous. But what we were finding is that we were just failing terribly in the prosecution of domestic violence cases, right? Because the victims are so frequently uncooperative. But at the same time, we recognized how really terribly dangerous those crimes were. It's literally, lethality prevention. So we've partnered with a local behavioral health agency. It's called Youth and Family Services. They treat the entire family. No couples counseling. We recognize that's a terrible idea, but they have programs developed specifically for the entire family with the hopes of making the offender complete individual counseling to get him or her to a place where they can engage with the partner, include them in counseling, and heal the whole family. So we just started domestic violence diversion. We're very cautiously moving forward with that. We're seeing actually quite a bit of interest in it. We've had, just in the last year, 160 people referred and 95 participating in the last year in our domestic violence diversion. So one of the things that we've noticed across the board is a real problem connecting with our Native American population. So I had mentioned to you initially that the Native American population in our county is about 9%. But as far as system involvement, 41% of the people in our jails are Native American and 33% of the people in prison are Native American. It's just like racial disparity is completely out of control. And what we were seeing in our diversion programs is we were having trouble finding the right programs and connecting with them. So we have started a program that's really special. It's called Oyate Court. Oyate literally translates to people, so it's the People's Court. It's a new program that we've started that integrates Lakota culture into our diversion programming. What's really cool about it is it lets the Indigenous population assume greater responsibility for the administrative justice in their community. And it also allows them to reflect their own values into the justice system. So I'll just tell you briefly about it, because I went last Friday night, and it's really, really neat. So we've chosen Lakota elders and leaders in the Lakota community. They sit in a half circle with the participant sitting in the center of that circle. The participant tells the panel of elders what, in this instance, it was a female, what she had done. There's a factual basis that's provided to the elders so they know what the crime that was committed was. In this particular instance, it was a 19-year-old who'd been consuming alcohol. So she says which crime she committed, and then the panel asks her questions, just peppers her with questions about why and when and where. And within 5 minutes of being questioned by her elders, the leaders in her community, she was in tears and explaining to them that she had never felt loved, that she was the caretaker for her addicted mother, that she worked full-time to support her entire family. And within a 15-minute time frame, she was linked to a Lakota sister mentor, an older Lakota woman who would assist her in navigating her program plan. She was linked to behavioral therapy, group therapy, or family therapy, so her entire family could address the generational trauma that they were impacted by. And I mean, her case plan that was developed by that committee of Lakota elders was really impressive, and she's invested. It needs to be the right person, obviously, someone of Lakota culture who embraces that. Like sweats were part of her plan so that she could, you know, go to a sweat lodge and heal. But what we found is that integrating that culture makes it so much real, so much more real and meaningful for the participant. And I think that diversion program is going to be really, really fantastic for us. So I don't want to go any more over time, but I have all kinds of statistics and plans for all of our diversion programs that I can make available to any and all of you, and would stand for any questions that you have about our programs.
Laura, thank you so much. I think your programs sound so innovative, and you've highlighted, you know, compassion, being in the criminal justice system, cultural competency, being able to understand each other. And really one thing that you brought up that was very interesting was post-program outcomes. What are the legal outcomes of your diversion programs? Thinking it through all the way from start to finish, having an expungement at the end of completion is incredible. And so just thank you both again for speaking with our group and for chatting about your programs, these incredible programs that are really reshaping what justice looks like. We have a few questions, and I know that there is our Q&A box, but I will start with one question. You both said that you were partnering with groups. You were getting these groups together and became partners in this diversion programs. But can you tell us how you began working with your program stakeholders? Was it them reaching out to you, or was it you reaching out to them? And how did that happen?
I'll go on mine, Laura. You know, Portland, for being a metro area of over 1 million, you know, the criminal justice system kind of small. And I have good connections with county mental health and with treatment, like drug treatment providers and whatnot. What we did first was we sat down with our judge because he's the one that ultimately is going to make a lot of the decisions. And we decided at that point who we thought we needed at the table to help us design this. And, you know, for the drug treatment component, you know, we have a couple of, you know, very prominent, you know, nonprofit drug treatment groups and centers here in Portland. And, you know, it was a simple phone call. Call the director there. Hey, we're starting a new treatment court. Can you send, not like, would you be interested, but can you send someone to this first meeting? For mental health, we used our mental health court judge and her contacts to say, you know, we need help designing, you know, what exactly we're going to offer. You know, if we're going to offer cognitive therapy or dialectical behavioral therapy, you know, we want someone at the table that can help us design this. Who do you suggest? She throws out a name, and then, you know, that was my call again, was, you know, call that person and say, Judge Waller said that you might be able to help us with this. And, you know, to sort of take it from the other side in terms of approaching a prosecutor, I don't know any prosecutors' offices that aren't desperately in need of help. We are all very much under the gun when it comes to just caseloads right now. And you know, any offer of help, I would imagine, is going to be warmly received by a prosecutor's office. So we just called, and it was just sort of like, you know, we're all in this together, and can you help us design this program? Never was the answer no to any of those calls.
And for example, when we were building Oyate Court, the way that we chose our initial panelists of elders and leaders from the Lakota community was, and we're lucky because we're a small community and we have close proximity to Pine Ridge Reservation and a lot of connections to people there that run relevant programs. So that's how we identified our first group of panelists, was by identifying resources and finding the person within that resource who would be best representative on our panel. So each of the panelists really represent an opportunity or a specialty or a program that's available within the Lakota Nation to provide resources for that population. So yeah, I mean, it really comes down to knowing people and building relationships. It just can't be overstated that, you know, you have to find ways to get into meetings and meet people.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something you've both highlighted so perfectly in your programs and in this conversation, especially, you know, sometimes the best way to engage a prosecutor is not to engage a prosecutor, engage someone else and really get in that foot in the door. But I do have to, you know, hear what Jeff is saying. And definitely, I think most prosecutors that we talk to, and Laura, you touched on this as well, they're hungry for this. They want these programs, they want to develop them. So I echo I can't imagine anyone saying no to this or to a conversation about finding a way to really do better, be more compassionate, and help everyone's caseload and efficiency. So, but one challenge that does come up in terms of stakeholders is if they aren't on board when you've reached out to them, or you've got a great partnership with a community provider, and there are certain maybe if there's a case example you have or a program example that you have in which it wasn't successful, and any lessons that you learned from that experience.
Laura, do you want to go first?
I'm trying to think of one.
I got one, so I'll give you a break. You know, we modeled a program of an actual deflection type program, deflecting someone before they came into the criminal justice system. We modeled after Seattle's LEAD program. And this was under my immediate former DA, Rod Underhill, who's a great innovative thinker and a really good guy. And, you know, he really liked what he saw out of Seattle's LEAD program, which is, you know, the idea that people, you know, officers on the street are going to come into contact with people who are struggling with addiction, and maybe also because of their addiction, they're engaging in theft or prostitution or whatnot. And it, you know, it creates a situation, particularly in a core urban area of a lack of safety, quite frankly. And Seattle did a great job of developing a program where officers would engage with a person that is in the throes of that type of addiction, and you know, basically invite them, take them to meet with a social service provider in a safe place, rather than take that person to jail. And that was great. And he got a lot of positive media attention, a lot of positive attention from other prosecutors, from social service agencies and whatnot. And we wanted to do that here. And we wanted to start small. We wanted to see how it was going to go. We got funding from our county commission, which would, and from the city of Portland, which would allow us to start this program in a sort of pilot area down in the downtown core area of Portland. But you know, I can't put my finger exactly on why it didn't take off, but I have some theories. And one is that, you know, our police bureau, who is our major supplier of cases, you know, the Portland Police Bureau gives us 90% of our cases, and it was their jurisdiction in downtown Portland. They never fully bought into the idea. They didn't staff it up. They didn't train up their people. So, you know, our LEAD program started off, you know, pretty good, 30 to 40 referrals a month. You know, officers would actually, you know, take the officers that worked that beat, that worked that district, they knew who they were dealing with. They would say, "Ooh, this doesn't look good. Let's go over and talk to this person." You know, or I can take you to jail. You know, or to be like, "Yeah, I'll go talk to someone rather than go to jail." But with staffing changes, both at the management level of the bureau and, you know, at the sort of street level, it just never really caught on with them. So by February of this year, right when Ballot Measure 110, which I mentioned earlier, was actually, you know, being implemented, you know, the number, which had been in the 30s and 40s per month, which is a good rate of deflection, quite frankly, people that aren't entering the criminal justice system, you know, we're down to 4. We had 4 referrals in February. None after that. So our lead program sort of died on the vine for a number of different reasons, but I'd say a primary one. I don't want to sort of besmirch my friends in the Portland Police Bureau. They're very well intended and very hardworking and very much, maligned right now. But without sort of full-throated support and full engagement, if you think of it like the classic three-legged stool, well, one of the legs of our stool just didn't reach the ground on this, and it never really took off. So everybody's got to be all in for a program like this to work. I guess that's the moral of my story.
And
Well, and I think that, oh, go ahead, Laura.
I can't think of any program failures or lessons to be learned from a wide-scale failure, but I know that we continue to struggle with convincing community members and constituents that diversion is a best practice and a better alternative to traditional incarceration and probation. And it's a very conservative jurisdiction here. Innovation and progressiveness is not necessarily exciting to a lot of people. The status quo is more so. So doing PR and telling people about your successes and efforts is really important. And I think that oftentimes those of us in programs that are running them and being part of them, we know about those successes and we know the programs are awesome, but we just don't do a good enough job about sharing that with the public, whether it's social media or, hooking in with a reporter to run a story about you. We really have to make an effort so that the community knows and understands why what we're doing is important and that it's working.
Yeah, I mean, being able to really get that relationship built and then build it out into the community is absolutely crucial. So thank you for highlighting that point as well. And then the last question I'll ask for this portion of our webinar today is really, were there any special arrangements that you and your program stakeholders were able to make? Is there something that went in place? Was there an MOU or other policies and procedures that you worked together to create, and how did that come about? And Laura, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, you definitely need those things. You need MOUs, you need information sharing agreements. We can help you and give access to documents like that. If you don't have them in place, you absolutely need to, because you're sharing confidential information about people, within your teams and with people sometimes outside of your teams, depending on how your programs are designed. So yes, you definitely need to have them, and examples are available for you if you don't have them in place.
Same here, Rebecca. We don't for step court, we didn't have an MOU that says everybody's going to try to do this, but what we worked off of and what we've been working off of since April, so 7 months now, is our policy document, our step court policy document. And we would, at every meeting, we would go through that developing document sort of line by line, and we would send it out ahead of time and say, this is where we ended last time, let's talk about this. Who's eligible, who's not eligible, who has the power to say no, who has the power to say yes, who's going to be in the room when decisions are made. And it was sort of an organic process, but where we are now with that is we have a document that the judge, the DA's office, the defense attorneys, parole and probation, treatment providers, have all agreed is our sort of guiding document. So not really an MOU that the powers that be have signed and that we've memorialized somewhere, but what we have is a collaborative policy and practice document that we came to through a lot of hard work, a lot of discussions. We will have, and we'll use sort of a standard data use agreement because we're going to want to be able to report our our successes or identify areas where improvement is needed. There's going to be concerns. Some of the information in the data use agreement will agree that it's masked, so we don't have identifiers, but we have enough information to see trends and where success lies and where failure might be more prominent. So we will have all that stuff.
That's great. Thank you so much. I love the differences in your jurisdictions just continue, and yet both so successful and so wonderful. So thank you again for sharing all of that information with our group today. I'm going to turn it back over to Demetrius, who is going to have a few questions that I see in our chat box from our audience.
Thanks, Rebecca, and thanks, Jeff and Laura, for lending your expertise and giving us a bit more information about the programs that you have all in your jurisdictions. I just want to remind folks that we are now moving into the participant Q&A section of the presentation. Next slide, please. So again, while we see questions coming into the Q&A panel, you can also advance the next slide. I just want to remind folks that if you have any questions, please put them in the bottom right-hand panel of your screen, and we'll address them as we'll get through. Again, we'll try to get through as many questions as possible. A few questions that we have that have come through. And again, just a reminder that these are questions, participants, that you can ask both Rebecca or Rebecca, Jeff, and Laura about their programs and their work or what they've just presented on. One of the questions that we have, and we had a few come in, and I want to address these to both Jeff and Laura. Laura, I'll kick it to you first since Jeff just went last. We had a few questions on intellectual and development disabilities. And the questions were, while great strides had been made around mental health and drug-related issues around certain programs, what folks are noticing is that there isn't really programs designed for people with IDD, because IDD, and this was a point made, IDD is very different from mental illnesses. Do you all have any programs that consider folks with IDD, or do these current programs include people with IDD? And if so, what does that look like? Laura, I'll kick that to you, and then Jeff, if you have any response, I'll let you go after Laura responds.
So I'm lucky because two of my victim advocates come from an IDD background, so they're really good at working with identifying and assisting and guiding our office programs that involve IDD clients. Those are perfect people for diversion programs. I mean, they're just perfect. And so we're incorporating as much as we can IDD as well as our mental ill clients into those diversion programs, specifically young adult diversion and adult diversion. And what's so great about them is we can give very, specialized targeted case plans instead of just that cookie cutter probation or parole. So if they meet guidelines, which they do, they're definitely getting funneled into that arena, and they're perfect for it, quite frankly. And we have great resources in our community that can support us in their treatment plans so that we can get them through the criminal justice system and keep them out of it in the future.
Demetrius, that's a great question, and I appreciate it. And I got to say that needs to be sort of the next focus. That is an underserved group here in Multnomah County and in Oregon. So our mental health court, which I said was thriving, but is limited to sort of the big five, mental health disorders. And that's primarily because of funding, because we get a lot of our funding for our mental health court from the Oregon Health Plan, which some people may know is, a statewide sort of health funding program. But, you need to have, one of the big five disorders in order to actually get into our mental health court. Our step court will not be limited as such, and that's because we're taking it we're taking people in not based upon sort of whether or not they qualify based on some disorder, but what their charge was and whether or not we think that they can be successful in the program. So anybody with any sort of IDD will be welcomed, and will fashion a treatment program for them. So it's more charge based and more inclusive. Obviously it's going to be, hey, there's somebody, this person committed a very serious crime, and we're going to have to want to make it work. But really that's I think the next frontier in criminal justice diversion and deflection is how are we going to deal with, and what are we going to do for, how are we going to serve someone with an IDD? So that's my answer.
Thanks. A few questions, Jeff. I'm going to stick with you for a while because we just had some specific questions about the ballot measure, and I'm going to ask them slowly. But it was three back-to-back rapid questions. The first was, what happens if someone is repeatedly given non-criminal violations? So I guess the ask there is, can someone continuously be given a non-criminal violation if they keep calling? And then the second thing was, who is responsible for calling, and how do folks know what number to call, and what is defined as street drugs?
Those are all great questions. Trying to take them in order. What was the first one?
The first one was, what happens when someone is repeatedly given non-criminal violations? So I guess does the non-criminal violations begin to add up and then they're no longer eligible?
Now, and this program wasn't designed by prosecutors. Was designed by people that were definitely, in favor of of treating drug addiction or drug problems or drug possession as a health issue as opposed to a criminal issue. So there is no sort of minimum number of times that a person can get caught with a user amount of drugs, and before the police or the court is going to say, you no longer get this. What the idea is the door is always open to at least introduce the person to the treatment opportunities. And if they don't take advantage of that, then there's I think it's $100 fine, which again I don't think will often be paid or recouped by the court. The takeoff has been slow, and there's media reports about that, local and national, that I think since September, like 7 people have called statewide to avail themselves of the possible treatment opportunity. So that's not many when we had, before this, 9,000 prosecutions for drug possession in Oregon in 2019. How do they know who to call? Well, the officers that are giving the citation, the information's right there. You can avoid having to pay a fine if you make this phone call. Here's the number. And those centers are staffed. That was part of the funding. They're getting funding from Oregon's marijuana tax. So marijuana was decriminalized in 2015 in Oregon. And the tax that is received from sales of recreational marijuana use is used in part to fund these. There was a third one, Demetrius. It probably slipped off my radar.
No worries. The third one was, what is defined as street drugs?
Oh, yeah, okay. I actually pulled that information up before we started, and it's your usual stuff. I mentioned some of them. We're talking about heroin, methamphetamine, cocaine, ecstasy or MDMA, psilocybin, oxycodone. So kind of anything you can think of, I guess, short of nutmeg or orange pieces.
Got it. Thanks, Jeff. And then I also have a follow-up question, Laura. And I think I'm going to direct this question to you because you talked a lot about victims and the role of prosecutors in looking at victims. And the question that we have, and I apologize in advance, participant, if I butcher this question. I'm going to try to summarize it as best as I can. So the question was, are victim impact interviews used to determine sustainability for a program? And if so, are victims asked a specific series of questions, or is it more fluid? So I guess the question is, does the victim in their impact has any bearing on whether a person can participate in any of your diversion programs? And if so, how much weight is given to that? And are you maybe looking at some type of outcome measure and seeing how successful the program is in Q&Aing or following up with victims if they are attached to a particular crime or individual to a crime?
Well, that's a good question, and it's controversial in the diversion world, which is probably why it got asked. In Pennington County, we don't accept a person into diversion unless the victim has agreed for that person to be in diversion. It's not like that everywhere. Sometimes a prosecutor, prosecutor-led diversion programs will use prosecutorial discretion to trump a victim's wishes and put a client into a diversion program without victim permission. The current state of affairs here is we want that victim entirely on board. And for us, that has a lot to do with the fact that we actively seek expungement on behalf of that system-involved person at the end of successful completion. And we wouldn't want to stand against a victim at an expungement hearing. It's just kind of not who we are. So our current policy is to not recommend a person for diversion unless the victim is in agreement with that process. And we utilize our victim advocates to onboard, make sure they know and understand the program, try to sell it to them so they're educated on what it offers as opposed to a traditional criminal justice system contact, and get them on board. And then the other thing that we do that's really cool that the criminal justice system can't do is that restorative justice piece, which is offering an opportunity when it's appropriate for the victim and the offender to meet. We have, people trained to do restorative justice and have that contact, which can be really, really healing for all kinds of victims, even just property victims.
Thanks, Laura. Jeff, did you want to answer that question at all? I saw you shaking your head earlier.
Yeah, I think we're a little, we haven't adopted the sort of victim has to agree in order to allow a person into step court. I think, and I believe this, although we're at the front end of this experiment, so we'll see how it plays out. But I think we're going to be able, through just calm, rational conversation with victims, trauma informed, and carefully worded conversation, that hey, in the grand scheme of things, this is going to be better, and we'll see. We, like Laura said, we don't want to stand in opposition to a victim's wishes, but I think we're going. This is Portland. I think we're going to be able to have sort of a meeting of the minds. Like I said when I was talking, a short prison sentence is not going to do much good, and maybe do more harm than good in this situation. If we can keep a person in the community, keep them employed, get restitution flowing to the victim, and keep them, crime free, that's a win for everybody. And I think that most of the victims, even of violent crimes, are going to be able to appreciate that. I hope so. I don't know.
I think they are, and I think that we've been, very, very successful in onboarding victims in that regard. And I can't think of an example of when we weren't.
A few more follow-up questions, and this is one I would direct to both of you, and I think it has to do with and it's really around collaboration, and in there being inherent tensions between the different roles that some of these cross-system partners may have. And the question is, have you seen this, and how have you, if at all, been able to overcome it? The question is, did your organizations feel they were leveraged to do more due to their partnership, and I guess that means their partnership with the prosecution, or because what they're finding, this person asking the question, is that teaming with mental health hospitals in areas sometimes has become strained due to the needs of both sides. So is that cross-system collaboration and the inherent tensions that may be between prosecution and defense, or a defendant or someone who's in your diversion programs in the prosecution. Specifically, the question was around the mental health professionals, and I will assume the prosecution, law enforcement. But are you seeing tensions come up? Are people feeling more beneficial for having you all as partners? And if so, what does that look like, and how are you able to address it?
Man, I think everybody's tense right now, aren't they? I mean, it's just, the world is a dark and crazy place. So I think, yes, I think there's there's a lot of tension in all relationships right now. And I think that's why it's important that you be able to have those hard conversations, right? And sit down with your group and say, all right, what's going on? Let's talk about the issues that have arisen and let's remember why we're here. You know, especially with our medical providers, I think we're seeing, you know, they're just so strained and the resources are so limited for them right now that they're not able to do, and mental health providers specifically, you know, the state of mental health in America is catastrophic right now, and so resources are really strained. But I think what we're doing is so important, and if we just remind each other of that, then we can come back together again. But yeah, I mean, I think we've all experienced tension in those relationships, but you just have to remember your core values and why you're there.
You know,
Jeff, did you want to respond?
Demetrius, I don't have much to add other than, yeah, there's tension, but, you know, we're all professionals too. And we can agree to disagree, and we can sort of stay in our lane, but share our views. I've never had it to the point of a breakdown. People have different ideas about crime and punishment, and you know, where the sweet spot is for an individual or for a system. But it's, you know, we in Multnomah County anyway, we collaborate. We sometimes over collaborate. And so, you know, I think that's actually a good thing, but you know, it might slow the process, but I think it gets everybody where they want to be.
And that's a great tie into this very last question, because we're at 1 minute over, and we still have to do some final wrap ups. But I think that's a great question, Jeff. And I'm going to start with you only because it was a specific question asked around the step court program. And the first question was, how did you all come up with your eligibility criteria for the step court? And in terms of the collaboration, was this done in collaboration with stakeholders? And how often, again, I'm sorry, a series of questions, how often do you all review the criteria for the program?
So
you got it.
We came up with it, you know, sort of internally. We had ideas of what, you know, what crimes actually would not be appropriate. Either what, you know, we didn't think, you know, somebody that commits an attempted murder, tries to kill someone, you know, that person generally, we believe, presents an ongoing danger because they were unsuccessful in their attempt to kill someone. So not good. You know, DV, as I said, needs its own special treatment. We wanted to focus on some of the violent crimes and the violent crimes where there is you know, disparities in you know, racial and ethnic disparities in the results we get now. So that's why we focused on what we did. Give me the second one, Demetrius.
Yes, the second one was the determining the eligibility done in collaboration with stakeholders?
Yeah. Well, yes and no. You know, this goes back to the question before about tension, because you know, bless our like criminal defense attorney brothers and sisters, but they would want everybody to be eligible, and they wanted, you know, one of the things that they wanted, and our judge too wanted to be in the room when final offers were decided upon, and you know, voices were raised, and ultimately I said, look, you guys aren't, you know, charged constitutionally with exercising your prosecutorial discretion. We are going to continue to do that. You're going to have to trust us. We brought this idea to the table. So if you think we're setting ourselves up for failure, we're not, but you're going to have to trust that we are all in on this, but we're still going to exercise our own discretion. It was a bitter pill, I think, but once we got past it, then the decision was made.
And just to that point, is there opportunity in your programs to review eligibility and adjust if necessary?
In fact, you know, this is what I said during the meeting. This is such a great question. When, you know, but what about if this? What about if this? And what about that? I said, look, you know, I'm here 12 hours a day. If you have a question about a particular client and you think, gosh, I really want this person to be considered, then call me up. and we'll consider it. I'm not slamming the door on anyone, because we do have that discretion. There might be the case. There might be the person charged with a sex crime, which we've said no, but that's still based on our discretion. We think, this might be a good fit. And, you got to treat similarly situated people the same. That's one of our, basic tenets. But at the same time, you've got to be able to exercise some discretion. And so, yeah, we'll review them. We're going to have an ops meeting monthly, and, a staffing weekly. And so, yeah, it's be constantly under review. We want it to be successful, though. We're starting small.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks. And so, in the spirit of time, it's 2:35. It's 5 minutes over. I want to respect everyone's time, including our speaker and panelists. But if you can just hold on for 3 minutes, I'm going to fly through these last 4 slides that we have. The next slide is on slide 36, is what we had intended to have an open dialogue with Eunice. I'm sorry. We wanted to have an open dialogue with you all for folks to make it kind of sort of like a community peer-to-peer opening engagement conversation. And we had prepped these slides for you all to ask questions amongst each other and throw things out. But because you all were such a robust group with so many questions, we couldn't get to this. But these are just questions that you all should be thinking about if you are looking to or wanting to work with prosecutors in your programs. The next slide is just a slide of resources that we offer from APA development, as well as some information on the LEAD program. And I know that Laura also said she can provide some resources on some of her programs, but these are just some resources that you all can look up in terms of working with prosecutorial programs, as well as working with prosecutors in some programs that are working with or being led by prosecutors, so you can see how they function, how they run, and some best practices. The next slide is just some contact information. So if you wanted to have a question and you couldn't get a chance to answer it, or some other questions comes up, our speaker and our panelists have graciously volunteered their email addresses. So if you have any follow-up, feel free to reach out to them. And then finally, I want to thank you all for joining the webinar. And if you hadn't done so already, we really encourage you all to join the CSG Justice Center newsletter listserv. Not only is it a great way to learn more about funding opportunities such as the JMHCP TCA grant program, but it's also where you will receive information on upcoming trainings and resources from our agency and our partners. I also like to remind everyone that this webinar has been recorded, and we'll be posting it along with the slide deck on the CSG Justice Center events webpage. So again, I want to thank Rebecca, I want to thank Jeff, I want to thank Laura for their time and their expertise and speaking to us about some of the great work that their prosecutors are doing in their jurisdictions. And everyone, have a great rest of your day and great holiday season coming up. Thanks again, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you so much.